Because God wanted to make the unchanging nature of his purpose very clear to the heirs of what was promised, he confirmed it with an oath. God did this so that by two unchangeable things in which it is impossible for God to lie, we who have fled to take hold of the hope set before us may be greatly encouraged. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. It enters the inner sanctuary behind the curtain, where our forerunner Jesus has entered on our behalf. He has become a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. I love the picture of the anchor. I think it's one of the most beautiful images in the Bible. And I've given you all a little card with it written on it. We have this hope, because I thought it's just, visually, it's just lovely. And I thought it'd be lovely if you can see it and it can remind you that we have this hope as an anchor for the soul. Maybe it'll be for you, or maybe you'd like to give it away to somebody who would appreciate that. For most of my life, I imagined an anchor to be about this big. I thought it was a bit like a piece of jewelry, but slightly bigger, this big, this thick, which is really silly. Obviously didn't put much thought into that. How that could hold a boat, I do not know. But I do remember that the first time I saw an anchor, I was like, whoa, they're really big. I don't know if you've seen them. Often at seaside towns, they have them by the sea, and they're like this big and this wide and this thick. And they're massive, really massive, which is not surprising because their job is to hold a ship in place. And obviously ships vary in size, from being fishing boats to enormous, great ocean liners. So I'm sure anchors vary in size too, but their job is a strong one, and their job is a heavy duty. I looked it up in the dictionary, of course, and the definition of an anchor is a heavy object attached to a cable or chain and used to moor a ship to the sea bottom. So the role of the anchor is to moor the ship to the sea bottom. It's to hold it in place. It's to prevent it from being lost at sea. It's to prevent it from, drifting off course, maybe overnight while the crew rest, or, while it's being loaded up. But it's to keep the boat in place. So you can imagine the anchor is deep at the bottom of the ocean, and the boat is up here on the surface. So the boat is still very exposed to the elements. The anchor holds it in place, but it doesn't protect it from the wind. You know, the wind is still going to toss the boat, and the waves are going to move it, and the rain is still going to hit it. It's not covered, it's not sheltered, but it's held firm. And I think this is a beautiful picture of what Jesus does for us. He is not a raincoat for us. He doesn't cover us over so we don't feel any of the blows of life. He is an anchor so that we don't get lost at sea. Life is still going to be full of heartache with Jesus. Everyone experiences it. I am certain that every single person in this room will have experienced heartache to some degree. And there's no kind of scale to say, oh yes, you have officially experienced heartache. You have to have this epic, awful thing happen to you for you to qualify as having had a hard time. A hard time can vary from, it could be financial problems, it could be depression or loneliness, it could be as awful as, and life-changingly awful as like the death of a family member or a child, or it could be the death of a dream that has just disappointed you to the core of your soul and has just left something painful there. We all go through heartache, and I think that it's important to recognize that if it's real to you, it's real. It doesn't have to be real to other people. Life is hard, but you will not ever be lost at sea with Jesus as your anchor. So this year has probably been the hardest year of my life, and that sounds really epic, but actually I've had quite an easy life, so it's not really that bad. But we moved here a year ago with 4 small children. My youngest was 10 weeks old and the oldest was 5, so that is intense on its own. And then we moved, and we left our support networks and moved from a village to the city. I stopped having a car that I could strap them all into and had to start getting them about on the bus, and it's just a lot of change, and it's just been a really overwhelming year, and it's been exhausting. And as a very visual person, I've kind of had all these images of myself, of what I'm going through. And one of them was like hanging off a cliff like Mufasa. We're very into the Lion King at our house right now. But the other one, the main one, was just being slightly underwater. Like the water is here and my head's here, and I just can't quite get above it. like I'm flailing around. There's nothing to grab hold of. And in my own strength, like I just can't get out. And it's really hard, and it's not fun. And it just feels like I'm going to drown. Can't do this on my own, going to drown. Maybe you've experienced that. Maybe you are experiencing it. It's not fun when you just know you've reached the end of yourself and there's nothing you can do. But then this summer, I feel like God's really spoken to me a lot about the year. The year is ended. We moved here last August, so this August it's been a year. And honestly, it's been like huge. God's just spoken to me so much. And I can see this year now for what it's been. And actually, I was wrong. I've not been under the water. I've been in a little boat. And yes, it's been a bit wild. And it's been a bit dark and a bit rainy. But I have always been held safely in the harbour. And I've come to the end of the year and I can see, it wasn't that awful. God did some good stuff in me. It's been a fruitful year, and it was a stripping back and a humbling, but I was never drowning in the middle of the ocean. I just love what Paul says. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed. We are not alone, and in perspective, we are held in the harbour, held by the anchor. So I'm just going to move on to our second passage, which is from Matthew, and the reference is Matthew 7, 24 to 25. I'm going to read this from the Message version. These words I speak to you are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words to build a life on. If you work these words into your life, you are like a smart carpenter who built his house on a solid rock. Rain poured down, the river flooded, a tornado hit, but nothing moved the house. It was fixed to the rock. But if you just use my words in Bible studies and don't work them into your life, you are like a stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. When a storm rolled in and the waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards. That is just like fantastic visual imagery, that is just so clear. And actually, it's quite full of personal responsibility. This is quite different from the image of the ship, because the ship is just here on the water, just being a ship, and the anchor is the one holding it in place. The ship doesn't have to work to be held. But here, Jesus is giving us responsibility. He's saying you need to choose. What are you going to build your life out of? What is going to be the foundation? And so let me just read that bit again. If you just use my words in Bible studies and don't work them into your life, you are like the stupid carpenter who built his house on the sandy beach. When a storm rolled in and the waves came up, it collapsed like a house of cards. So imagine this. My eldest, Seren, is 6, and I say to her, Seren, can you come and clean your room? And she's like, okay. So off she goes, and I go off to do something else, and like an hour passes, and then I call her and I say, how are you getting on? And she says, and she comes running in and she's like so excited. And she's like, Mum, you're going to be so proud of me. I've worked so hard. And I'm like, that's brilliant. And then she says, so I wrote down what you said, word for word. And then I put it into Google and I translated it into Greek and then back into English again. And you'll never guess what? The word you used for tidy up can be more accurately translated, clear up. Fascinating. And then I got Poppy, my sister, and we sat down and we talked about the context and we wondered what you meant when you said it and if it still means the same now. Well, you all know that's not what I was looking for. And I think that's like Jesus here. He's giving us a real responsibility. He wants to see this in action, okay? He has provided us the building material. He has given his life to be the rock of ages on which we can build our house. Will we use them? Will we take up what he has offered to build our life upon? Will it be the foundation of our home, of who we are? Or will we just appreciate the beautiful imagery and, the wonderful words of a wise teacher, but not actually allow them to change our lives? I love how the psalmist says, unless the Lord builds the house, the laborers build in vain. It's really clear. Unless the Lord builds the house, the laborers build in vain. So the foundation of Jesus is so secure and so strong and so firm, but we do have to make a choice that that's where we want to build our house. A house built on our own wisdom is a house of cards built on the sand. Can you imagine a house of cards built on the sand? As the sea comes in, there's just no chance. So, what does it look like? I'm going to guess that we all want to build a house on the foundation because it's the obvious answer. But what does that actually look like in our day-to-day life? How do we actually physically build our house on the foundation of Jesus? Well, I think we've had 2 great talks already from Maura and Sam on depending on the Holy Spirit and never giving up, sowing into what is life-giving and making that choice to really practice these things. Those were practical advice for how we start to build our lives on Jesus. But primarily as well, we need to get to know Jesus. He is the one, he is the way. And we all know that when we have a relationship that's important to us, we invest in it and we prioritize it and we put that person first and we are interested in what they are interested in and we lay aside some of our own interests. We'll go and watch rugby league games when it's like the most boring thing in the world. And, we choose to focus on what the person we love is interested in. And we love Jesus. We need to love him more and more, to fall more in love with him. And the way we do that is to get to know him better, more and more. He is the cornerstone. Will we build our lives upon him? So going back to the anchor and the storm, life can get really dark sometimes. And this passage again assures us that the storms will hit. I know this story so well. I grew up in a Christian family and I loved all the songs about the rain coming down, the floods coming up, and I've known this story my whole life and loved it. But literally, it was only as I prepared this talk that it really hit me how this is not just a house. This is not just talking about the building materials. It's a house that is going to withstand a storm, that there will be storms. The NIV says, the rain came down, the streams rose, the wind blew and beat against that house. The Message version says a tornado hit. Wow. I have never experienced a tornado, but I imagine it would be absolutely terrifying. I imagine it would feel like the world was ending. I actually watched a couple of YouTube videos while I was preparing this, one about hurricane and one about tornado. And in both of them, there's like this roar of the wind, if you were there, it just must be all consuming, this roar of the wind. And then the air is full of rain and debris and trees and just, totally all around you, just this overwhelming disaster. It just must feel like the world is going to end. How can things get better after this horror of just overwhelming awfulness? It must just feel like the world is going to end. But the amazing thing is, I don't think any storms ever last forever. A storm they all blow themselves out. They are for a limited time. They go on, they move on. And actually, the storm goes down. The storm moves, the winds go down, and the house on the rock stood firm. You're still standing there at the end, firm on the rock of Jesus. And this terrifying, awful experience will pass. And so just take heart. Jesus said that it would be hard, but he said, take heart, for I have overcome the world. That's the bottom line. He has overcome the world. He says, these words I speak to you are not incidental additions to your life, homeowner improvements to your standard of living. They are foundational words to build a life on. If you work these words into your life, you are like a smart carpenter who built his house on a solid rock. Rain poured down, the river flooded, a tornado hit, but nothing moved that house. It was fixed to the rock. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. Let's just go back to the Hebrews passage. It says, God did this so that we can take hold of the hope set before us and be greatly encouraged. Be greatly encouraged. Be encouraged. Yes, you are at sea. Right now, you might be really at sea. The waves might be really high and the wind might be really wild, but you are anchored. And yes, your house takes a beating, and sometimes you probably can't see out of the window because of all the rain, and it feels like all the roof tiles are going to fall off. But the house on the rock stands firm. Jesus is your foundation, and your house will still stand after the storm. You are anchored, you are safe, you are solid. Be encouraged. The passage then goes on to talk about Jesus as our forerunner, entering the sanctuary on our behalf. I just find this such a comforting image. He has run ahead. He has been through every storm of life that we could even think of. The Bible says he has experienced everything that we do. He was mistreated, he was lonely, he was abused, he was beaten, he was, he lost loved ones, his friends died, he suffered everything. And he died and he rose victorious, and he's gone on ahead of us. He has gone on to the sanctuary, inner sanctuary, to intimacy with the Father. He has taken us to be children of God. Jesus is our forerunner. The Message version says, "We who have run for our very lives to God have every reason to grab the promised hope with both hands and never let go. It's an unbreakable spiritual lifeline, reaching past all appearances right to the very presence of God, where Jesus, running on ahead of us, has taken up his permanent post as high priest for us." So this is such amazing news. We're not trailblazers. When things are really hard, we can feel like the only person in the world, or the only person in the world that's gone through that. But Jesus has gone before us. He has blazed the trail. He has gone ahead. And he is here. He is our anchor. He has done the work. So this is an oxymoron or paradox or something like that. But the idea that we grab these promises with both hands, we grab them, and yet we let go and we let God. We surrender because it's his job. He's the rock. And he is the bottom line. There is nothing we can truly do in our own strength.